Hello, Bry. I'm so excited actually that this month's focus is on the component of attention. And I think we've both been thinking about it in preparation, haven't we? And maybe our thinking has taken us in slightly different directions. So that's going to be good to explore. So I'm going to kick off by asking you, Bryony, what's your freshest thinking about attention?
Yeah, it's I've just been doing some teaching, thinking partnership teaching. So it's it's amazing what I learn and from the people that are doing it. So attention is quite high in my mind at the moment. And I think a relearning of the I've had a relearning, yeah, about how that quality of attention, the more that we give it, the less that we're doing that sort of active listening. I'm as a thinker, I'm looking for that response in a day-to-day situation. I'm kind of going, am I fitting in? Am I not fitting in? And the more the sort of real recognition that the more that we give that attention, that stillness of our attention, that lack of collusion with the thinker's content, as it were, how much the thinker can start to release those assumptions. What are people thinking I should be saying? Am I getting it right or wrong? Does it make sense? Does it, there's so much sort of an inner monologue going on as a thinker, or what's going on. And then when you get that reliable attention, that quality of attention, you're not getting the feedback, which feels quite uncomfortable actually to start with. But then you see that gradual release, and that perhaps more of those pauses, more of those internal, oh, I can think, and it comes to that sort of paradox that you're there, but I'm not. I'm somewhere else completely in my thinking. I know you're there, but I can really, really release my thought process with that attention. What do you think?
I absolutely agree. One of the paradoxes in a thinking environment is that as the thinking partner, you are absolutely there, absolutely necessary, and also sort of not there and not needed at all. And attention out of all of the components is really where the thinker learns to think, in the sense of thinking independently, identifying limiting assumptions, digging beneath them, reaching, those untrue limiting assumptions that we live as true. And when one of the joys really of being a thinking partner over time, or a coach over time in a thinking environment, is that you recognize the improvements in people's independent thinking. You are needed less and less, but you are still absolutely needed, because without the component of attention, the quality of thinking is impaired. And I know that I think a lot often when I'm on the move, and I'm a very good thinker, I'm an incisive thinker, I'm an independent thinker, but I can always get further when I've got a thinking partner. And the components aren't in any sort of hierarchy. They're all equally important. All the components need to be in place for it to be a thinking environment. But there's something about attention which is really powerful. And I have an interesting relationship with it, Bri, because my wiring is very much, I don't choose to use the label, but very much ADHD wiring. My relationship to attention is incredibly complex. If I'm bouncy, it's really hard to pull myself into an attention space in normal discourse and conversation. And I can also over-attend, if you like. I can get absolutely fixated in flow, no idea what's going on around me, because it's about the regulation of that that's difficult for me. And yet, in 20 odd years, I don't think I've ever really had a problem giving someone generative attention in a thinking environment space. I'm sure it was harder at first and it's easier now because there's all those years of practice. But it's never been the component that I've had to most work on because it's been a relief. It's therapeutic for me to offer generative attention. It stills my chemicals. And I've never really understood why, but there's a lot of science now behind attention, which I'll talk about in a little while, that is really helping me to understand what's going on in my brain. And it's actually been, I don't know what my life, my practice would be like without the component of attention and without the thinking environment. I'd probably still be bouncing about all over the place. And I'm quite sort of hyper this morning. And so from waking up, I was really looking forward to this space because I know I love that feeling. I don't know, is it dopamine, that feeling of sort of calmness as soon as we were chatting and as soon as you pressed record and we got into a thinking environment space where we were not only thinking about attention, but also practicing it. I can literally feel my heart rate come down. And I know that if I'd thought on to check my blood sugar at the start and the end, that would come down too. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, it's that sort of, is it something to practice? Is it something well, you'll talk about some science. I don't know what's in your mind actually, so that'll be exciting. But yeah, from my own experience, I suppose I started off doing mindfulness sort of exercises a long time ago, and I think what resonated when you said that was this: what is it? You know, you're not actually, yes, you're at ease, but you've actually got a lot to keep you occupied. Your brain as someone giving attention. And it's not to say that attention has got to be this sort of zen, completely blank space. That's not it at all. Like there's constant activity going on, you know, with those three streams of attention. So the content, our response to it, the, you know, awareness of holding that space, holding the 10 components. But there's always something that we can give our focus to. And the minute that we give our focus to one thing, so in this case, we're, you know, watching the way that the thinker's face is working, or the quality of their voice, the sound of their voice, or where are they at in the process. We've got something for our minds to actually focus on. And actually that in itself is quite relaxing. If we've stopped sort of thinking that we've got to preempt and, you know, solve and whatever, it's just literally, we're kind of like, what's happening now? What's happening now? What's happening? So there's a kind of being in the moment and not fighting with that. You know, we might wander off and think about what we're having for dinner tomorrow, but it's that practice of bringing yourself back to it and having something of genuine interest that we can focus on, that is strangely like less busy than whatever we normally think about. What do you think?
I think it's always interesting. It's never not being interesting. I'm so easily bored, but I'm never bored. I'm never bored when I'm offering someone generative attention, even if they're thinking about something which is not of interest to me in my life, the fact that it's of interest to them in theirs, because what engages me is their thinking and where they're going with their thinking and enabling them to go further with their thinking and, you know, uncover those assumptions. So it's always fascinating. And that's something to work on as well, isn't it? You know, I know in the ideas room sometimes, you know, people want to talk about quite technical things to do with teaching that, you know, an assessment that are part of my past and not part of my now, but it's still fascinating to be able to offer that space. The science is no surprise that this came to me via a Brene Brown podcast when she interviewed Amishi Jha, and who just published this book, Peak Mind. If you can, yeah, there you go, Peak Mind. And Amishi is a neuroscientist, and that's what she is. She's a researcher. She researches the brain. And she's from an Indian family growing up in the UK and in America. And when she was challenged by a colleague and by her research findings, to research mindfulness. She was like, no, you know, she'd grown up in an environment where it was the guys who did, you know, the sort of yogic mindfulness and not the women. And she was very against meditation and all of that. And yet that's where her research took her. And she talks about, and this really resonated with me, it's the thing about the thinking environment is it's observationally based, it's empirically based, and it's the science that's sort of following afterwards. So while there's not always an alignment in language, there's an alignment in the spirit of it, if that makes sense. And she talks about how, think about your brain, sort of execute your brain as either having a spotlight on something or a searchlight on something, and our brain can't do both at once. We move from spotlight and focus like we do in a thinking environment to sort of searchlight. And that really made me think about how when we are facilitating thinking environment training, we're having, no wonder it's so exhausting, because we're moving, aren't we, constantly between spotlight and searchlight, because you're offering the focus, and at the same time you're having to read the room and you're having to sort of pay a different kind of attention. And what controls that in the sort of executive function of the brain, she calls the juggler. So you're juggling from one to the other. And the juggler is where I have my problems. You know, my juggler is not like amazing. And that was so helpful for me. But what's so interesting, and the thing that got her a book deal and the thing that is selling this book, is that having worked with, particularly her research participants were often people working in emergency situations like firefighters, and they had to very much move between spotlight and searchlight. And the answer is 12 minutes a day, meditation or mindfulness. And she did not want to find this. She did not expect to find this. And that's what she found. And so her research was around, you know, how people's brains operated, how efficient was that juggler, how efficient was the attention when people had worked on or worked up to that 12 minutes a day practice. Super interesting. And I think when we think about how you and I are coming from different career paths into this space where we're working together, it feels like a really lovely crossover. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that, you know, I've put a workshop up to so that people can explore this in this way, actually. Yeah, sort of coincidentally. But yeah, and I think there's another, I think when we come back to attention in a thinking environment, so we've got that sort of, let's call it mindful practice, meditative practice in giving attention. But the other side of it is when we get that right, there's a, I don't know, is it a sort of cumulative energy? There's a sort of sense of the dynamic attention that's been given to us as a thinker. And as a thinker, it kind of, I mean, I hadn't really thought of this before, but it's kind of got that, I'm just going to go where my thoughts are going. I'm going to see what comes up. I'm going to follow the moment of my thought. So yeah, it's an interesting one that I hadn't considered before, is actually there's that practice as a thinker as much as there is as a, in a different way, but it has got that feeling to it of being in the moment with your thinking, your freshest thinking, and how dynamic that can be as well. And I think the thing that I notice when people come together with their independent thinking in that way, with that attention that gives that thinker that opportunity to do their thinking in that way, there's something. And I think this is, you know, this sort of comes with a mindful practice anyway. There's a sort of recognition of self and an ability in that moment. And this is this sort of, perhaps we're going to wrap up in a minute, actually, otherwise we could be talking about this all day. But the other big thing that came to me was like something that came through our members group, actually. Somebody brought something up in there in one of the channels. And when you can be like that, when you can be truly present in the moment, how authentic we can be. What an opportunity to explore and when I say authentic, I don't mean, oh, we've got to be the best person that we ever were. I don't mean that at all. I mean, we are captured in that moment, wherever we're at, however messy and uncomfortable that is, however joyous and, you know, wonderful that is. There's that sense of being held in that space, being authentic. And that has an enormous, enormous power. So I think, yes, there's a combination of the other components, but I just really sense that, you know, and the sense of connection that comes when you are that authentic in that space. So just one final, what do you think, Lou?
I want to think some more about that because I feel it and I want to process it through. I think my final thought is how much thinking, how much independent thinking can be done in a really tiny amount of time if the attention is generative, if the thinking environment components are held in place. So we spend hours in endless meetings, and actually sometimes just even 5 minutes can make a real difference to someone's thinking. If that's all you've got, as long as you can hold the space, you might just do it. What do you think?
Absolutely. We can definitely specify time, and with that focus, again, we can use that time really well. We can have a small amount of time just to, I don't know, we know, our brains know how to do this. Or we can have you know, a half an hour or an hour and actually get to a very different quality of thinking in a different place. But yeah, the time is really, the boundary of time is really important, and that attention that we can give as a thinking partner, as a, you know, as a someone being present for the thinker, is also really helped by knowing that time. Yeah, it gives us that focus. I can't wait until our next conversation about the next component. And I shall be doing more thinking about this.
It's wonderful, isn't it? I appreciate these monthly thinking sessions, dialogues about the 10 components for your idea. And that's what I'm most appreciating about you, that you had this amazing idea, because I'm loving it.
And I appreciate the difference that you bring to, you know, to me.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll be back next month.